Welcome to Fringe Pop 321, the show that believes the world is stranger than we think, but thinking should not be strange. We're thrilled to have with us today Doreen Virtue. Doreen, you have a very long story, so we want to try to get to everything that's important, but compact it a little bit for the sake of the episode. But you were and are very well known in the New Age community. So we want to know why that's the case, but if you want to, you can start back at the beginning. I initially want to know, what was it that drew you into the New Age, ecosystem, the New Age worldview? So go ahead.
Okay, well, I was raised in New Thought Christianity, unity and Christian Science. And my family I'm fourth generation Christian Scientist, so that's all I've known. And so I was raised with Jesus, but we didn't talk about the crucifixion or resurrection. That just wasn't a part of it. And in Christian Science, there's this belief that the Bible authors needed help from Mary Baker Eddy because they were, as she said, illiterate. And it's just, I've repented for all that. But that's what I was raised with. And so they combine the supernatural with their own apocryphal work of the Bible. So I was raised with praying over not only my brother and I, and we'd have healings. I was one time where I had my little bicycle on a ramp and I went straight into the pavement. My knee swelled up like this, and my mom just prayed over it and the knee was fine. And our washing machine broke, and so she prayed over the washing machine and it was fine. Part of it was because we didn't have money, and so we couldn't afford repair people or doctors. But so I was raised with miracles, and I just thought that's how it was. I was told as a Christian, and that's what I believed. We would talk about Jesus, but like I said, it wasn't the gospel, and I didn't know that because I was raised with the King James Bible, which was so intimidating. And every week in Christian Science, they give you a verse or two to meditate on. And it's always out of context. It's always the happy verses. It's not the confrontive verses. And then I became a psychotherapist. I went to Chapman University and earned my BA and MA in counseling psychology, and was treating people with eating disorders and alcoholism and drug. And so I was applying kind of what I knew from Christian Science with my patients, and became very successful, and then became an author. Because of that, because I had a lot of case studies that I kept everyone anonymous.
So this was kind of a natural transition.
Progression, yeah, Christian Science to psychology. I wanted to help people, and that seemed like the natural because my friends had always used me as a sounding board. I was always the counselor of the kids, and so I thought, well, I'll just make that my profession. And then somewhere in where I was a psychologist or a psychotherapist, excuse me, I came across A Course in Miracles, and that's really where I went into New Age. My mother recommended it. She was reading Marianne Williamson's book, and so I started reading it, and I was intrigued by channeled works because of that, and I just poured over it. And I got the original Course in Miracles, which is a tome. It's it's over 1,000 pages long, and just really studied it. I related to Helen Schuckman, the channeler, because she was a psychiatrist, and it just seemed to speak my language.
Did the channeling part or any part of it seem incongruent with the Christian context that you had?
It was exactly the Christian context. It was, and she was a Christian Scientist herself. She had a Christian Science and a Jewish background, and so she was filtering it through that, I believe, and it was the same language I grew up with. So I thought, this is it. This is the secret. And then I thought, well, I would like to channel. And as a child, I'd had these supernatural experiences, healings. I'd seen things as a child. I'd had lucid dreams that I still remember like they were yesterday, where this old man would come in my dreams and he'd show me the future and other planets and just weird things. And I saw things like people that weren't there. So I kind of grew up with a real supernatural childhood mixed with kind of quasi-Christianity. And so my books, I kept writing them, and I got invited to speak at the Whole Life Expo in the early 90s. And I felt very honored. The Whole Life Expo at that time was a group of New Age teachers and probably kind of motivational teachers, and we would travel from city to city every other week, just in North America.
Did you have an initial successful book that sort of put you into that group or got you invited?
My first books were about eating disorders because
Okay.
that was my clinical specialty as a psychotherapist. And then I sent it out to a lot of publishers.
Right.
It was actually based on a dissertation I had written about the link between childhood abuse and the development of eating disorders. And then I turned that dissertation into a book. And I sent it out to a bunch of publishers, and 4 of them wanted it. And one of them was Hay House,
Okay.
who I had not read their books before, but I kind of did a writer's market, just kind of shotgun approach, agenting myself. And my mother was a huge fan of Louise Hay. And I'm not blaming her, but it came down to Rodale Press. Rodale Press was offering me, a really lucrative deal, commercials, a lot of money. Hay House was saying, well, we don't have money, but, come over here. And my mom said, please go with Hay House. And so I admit I wanted to please my mother, and I went with them. And I was just writing kind of psychology, health books. That's what their genre was at that time. They really weren't into psychic things when I first. In fact, you couldn't say the word psychic on any of their books. Interesting.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so I wrote a book with them, and that's how I got invited to speak at the Whole Life Expo. And then I became a regular on the circuit, and that introduced me to things that I found. This was what attracted me to the New Age. Was it seemed so cool and exotic, and like people had the answers. As a kid, I had been kind of shunned by other kids as being strange and weird, probably because I saw things that other people didn't see. And my vocabulary was Christian Science, so I would talk about manifesting before the law of attraction was a popular kind of buzzword. And so other kids were always like this with me. And so when I went to the Whole Life Expo and I saw all these kind of attractive people wearing chiffon, and tie-dye, and they just seemed so happy. I was like, I want to be in that crowd.
Yeah.
And so it was partly a social anxiety thing that got me in there, and also because I'm just a born researcher. Anything you put in front of me, I'm going to research. And so I wanted to know, what are chakras? So I just started to research it. And if you research anything enough, you kind of become a quasi-expert. And so then I thought, well, I'll just start teaching what I've learned. So I started teaching chakra classes at the Whole Life Expo. And then Hay House wanted a book on that, and then I started kind of increasing my my experiences with supernatural.
So as you're sort of moving from topic to topic, you're discovering new things. Was it sort of passive that you'd have a conversation and somebody would bring something up and you go, oh, I need to track that down, or were you sort of experimenting? I mean, which was it?
It was me being intrigued by things that I didn't know about that seemed just really interesting and exotic. And so I would just do as much research as I could. And then I think also trying to understand my own supernatural experiences. Why was I seeing things that other people couldn't see? And why do people become a psychotherapist? It's always to analyze yourself.
Right.
And so I think part of it was just trying to understand myself, and also really genuinely wanting to help people. I thought, these people seem happy, so maybe this is some secret that I can learn about and help others with.
Right. So you're sort of, you're trying to understand yourself. You feel like you're tapping into stuff that other people don't know, and that if you can master this, you can help them. I mean, this all sounds pretty good. So, I can see why you would get into it. It's still a little kind of unusual to me that there would be no red flags going off in your head.
Because I was raised with no filters, there was no warnings that I had ever read in the Bible, that anyone had ever told me. My whole family is many of them still New Thought. My brother has now become a born-again Christian, and so it's kind of he and I are the only ones in the family who have read the whole Bible and understand what the red flags are.
Tell us a little bit more about your books, because you became a hugely successful author. Anybody who goes to your Wikipedia page, for instance, you're going to get the grocery list of what you've written. So how did that sort of explode?
Well, I'm prolific. I love to write. Even when I was a kid in elementary school and junior high, I was on the newspaper committee and the yearbook later, and I took journalism classes early in college. And my father's a writer. He's got many books out on his genre, and then my uncle's a screenwriter. So writing has always been a passion. I've always wanted to write, and I just kind of write what's in front of me. I do absolutely regret my books, and I wish I had some way of recalling them, like the car dealers who can recall a car that's defective. You know, if I had a lasso that I could just get all those books off the market, I would. And the best I can do is take my time and talk about why I don't believe in those books anymore.
But I mean, you sold a lot, and the reason I'm going back to that is people need to know, if they don't know who you are, or if they haven't Googled your name or something. I mean, we'll have something on our website about you, so people should know that you weren't just sort of I mean, your interest wasn't casual. Your contribution, if we can use that word, to New Age thinking wasn't casual. It was substantial.
Well, I was the top-selling author at Hay House, and it just kind of happened. It wasn't a goal or anything. It was just, the publisher said it was the sheer number of products that I was putting out. Because when I was first writing, I had an agent with William Morris, and he told me I could only write one book a year, maybe one book every 2 years. And I was so frustrated, and because I just had so much that I wanted to talk about. And so I went off on my own. And when I was with my publisher, they said I could write as much as I wanted. So it was like a dream come true for me. And I can see now that it was a mistake, because I should have not put out so many apostate books, and especially the cards. The cards came about because I had a...
What kind of cards are we talking about?
Well, they're modeled after tarot.
Okay.
And tarot scared me. I'm very sensitive to symbols and words, and you know, I was raised with this thing, always be positive. The cardinal sin of the New Age is always, or never be negative. You know, so if there was like the 10 Commandments of the New Age, number 1 would be, thou shalt not be negative. You know, and so tarot scared me, but I was intrigued with predicting the future. That attracted me to the New Age. You know, I want to control the future because I'm thinking it's just me. I didn't see Jesus as a partner or someone I could call on. To me, because I was raised this way, he was a good man that God sent. I didn't see him as any different than Buddha or Krishna or anything. We called him an ascended master. I've repented for that.
Right. If you're taking out things like repentance and the crucifixion and all that, so there's no sense of, well, he's here to have. It has something to do with sin. You know, no.
The whole, and sin was a cuss word. That would be the commandment number 2. Don't say these Christian cuss words. Don't say hell. There's no hell. There's no consequences. Everyone goes to heaven. And that's the belief of the New Age that I came from, and I was writing about that. And so I would teach these workshops where people would come, and they'd tell me they were Christian or Catholic, and they were wearing crosses, and that kind of helped me to feel safe that I was writing something. And they would tell me, oh gosh, you're a gift from God, and your work helped me so much. And I what I've learned is that when you follow the enemy, he mixes truth and lies. And I really see that now that I'm converted in the Course in Miracles, which was my gateway. A Course in Miracles is a very long book that says that it was channeled by Jesus as explaining what he meant in the Bible, because people were not understanding. And so he says in Course in Miracles, it's not him, of course, it's, but the Course in Miracles says, forgiveness is the key to happiness. And I thought, well, that sounds right. You know, who can argue with that? So they'll give you enough truth with these channeled books to hook you in, and then take you down the rabbit hole of lies and deception. So the Course in Miracles says there's no crucifixion. The only devil is the ego. And as long as you stay positive and forgive everybody, then you're fine.
Now you mentioned you sort of went on the road.
Oh, 25 years on the road.
Okay, with some other very well-known New Age authors.
Yes.
So just say a little bit about that.
Well, it was a traveling circus. You know, we had people who had booths, and at the booths they'd be selling tie-dye clothing, incense, crystals, all of the accoutrements, you know, You could have brass pyramids.
So these weren't like, were they speaking tours, or that was included? Okay.
Yeah, so it'd be a whole convention of New Age
All right.
products and speakers. And they'd have a bookstore, and you'd sell your books and autograph it after the talk. And it was fun. I mean, I'm not going to put down those years. It was nice to meet people and connect with them. And I'm not a big fan of being on stage, but I can do it. And so I did that for 25 years, did TV, Oprah, and all the CNN, The View, and then worldwide, because my books were in 38 countries. And just, I was traveling nonstop, never unpacked my suitcase for 25 years.
Well, if you liked it and you saw benefit and you thought you were helping people, what changed? I mean, what made it unattractive at some point?
Well, as I mentioned, these cards.
Okay.
And so I made what are called angel cards, based loosely on tarot, that kind of told your fortune. They'd have a pretty picture of an angel and then a positive message like forgive or focus, things that were pretty innocuous. And they'd come with a little booklet that I would write 3 or 4 paragraphs about each card. And so those became kind of my the product that really put me on the map. Everyone wanted the angel cards and such, and the celebrities started using them, and they were on TV and such, and so there was this demand to create new cards as fast as I could, and I loved it. So I was happy with that demand. And then eventually I did create tarot cards, co-written with a tarot expert. Again, they were angels. We took off things like pentagrams and the word death or no devils. It was all pretty. But it was the same thing. And everyone said to me, because I would mention Jesus, because he was part of my pantheon, and people would say, well, you should make Jesus cards. And I said, no, that's my limit. No, I'm not going to make Jesus cards. Until I met this artist named Greg Olson. And Greg was painting Jesus like I imagined him, warm, accessible, smiling. And so Greg and his wife were fans of my work and agreed to create a deck of Jesus cards with me. And I prayed about it. I thought, I cannot just make up words for Jesus. I had enough respect that I said, well, I'm going to go to, and I used the New King James Bible, and I'm just going to pull quotes out of there for each card. And so to do that, I read the Gospels. This was 2016. I had never read the whole Gospels before. I had only read, ask and it is given, knock and it'll be open.
Like the catchphrases.
The happy things that they talk about in New Age and misuse. And so as I read the Gospels, I read in 2 of them, I think it was Matthew and Mark, that said, Jesus said, if you're ashamed of me, I'm going to be ashamed of talking about you. And that convicted me immediately, because I had been ashamed of talking about him, because the New Age audiences did not want to hear about Jesus. If I mentioned his name, they'd say, oh, it's not Jesus, it's Sananda, which is some made-up New Age name. Or they'd say it's Yeshua. They'd be mad at me for using the word Jesus. And me being a people pleaser, I'm like, okay, no problem, I won't talk about Jesus. And I only talked about Jesus when I was in the South, where, people wanted to hear about him. And so I got convicted by reading Jesus' words in the Gospels that said, if you're ashamed of me, and so I started talking about him more at that point. Even I pushed through the pushback. And I created these Jesus cards, and reading the Synoptic Gospels, it planted the seed I needed to plant. And so I told my husband, I want to go to church. I want to go to a regular church. And he had been raised Methodist, so he said, okay, let's go. But we never ended up going. But we'd talk about it every Sunday, and I kind of was being called by Jesus at that point. We moved to a new home, and right away I said, I want to go to church. So we started going to a Pentecostal church, and that really just fed me. The trouble was that the preacher would only talk for 5 or 10 minutes, and I needed more, so I started to kind of try different churches, and I tried Seventh-day Adventist because I'm a vegan. I thought, well, vegetarian Christians, yay. But that did not work. We finally ended up at Episcopalian, which at that time was what I call my bridge, because I couldn't have handled, now I'm a Baptist. I couldn't have handled that at the time. I couldn't have gone straight from New Age to Baptist. I had to have that bridge. And while I was there, they loved on me. and I had a big vision of Jesus there that completely changed everything. It was like he came to get me, because I was trying to mix Christianity with New Age. I'd go to church, go home, and film myself giving a tarot card reading, and I didn't see that that was a problem, because I hadn't read the whole Bible. No one told me that was wrong. I was going to a liberal church where people were talking regularly about Reiki and things like this. The preacher didn't, but the people in the congregation did. So I just was mixing the two, and on January 7th, 2017, I was at church, and I looked up, and there was this humongous Jesus, and this light coming out of his heart that it reminds me of when people talk about seeing the light, just this huge light, like 50 Mack trucks with their high beams on, just coming out of his heart. And I was physically pushed back in my chair by this, and it was like everything else disappeared, and I just saw Jesus, and all these thoughts and feelings started to happen. So the first thought was, I got to get out of the New Age. It was like complete conviction. Second thought was, wow, Jesus of the Bible is real. He's not an ascended master. I just knew that. And I also knew that he'd been crucified. It was like I could feel that, like all the sin of the world, just like the gravity on him. And I just thought, people are going to be really mad at me. That was my next thought. and then he disappeared, and I don't even know how I got home. I have no memory of the rest of that day, but I researched, seeing Jesus lights. So
yeah, I mean, that evidently that's what you needed.
I needed it. Yeah, he had to show up himself. And the two things that happened after that are what changed me. The first was that I read the whole Bible, Genesis to Revelation, and I keep reading it. And I got baptized. I'd never been baptized before. They don't do that in New Thought. And I just completely committed myself to Jesus. I had a weekly YouTube show that was having 180,000 views. I told everybody what was going on, what was happening. Like, here's my baptism picture. Now I've got a Bible with me. So I still was mixing. I didn't know what I was doing. I still was reading cards to people while giving them Bible verses. It took me a while. It was not until I read Deuteronomy 18:10 that convicted me. And that was, of course, God telling Moses in the Exodus, no sorcery, no witchcraft, no mediumship, no divination, no interpreting omens, that God finds that detestable. And that word detestable, it got me. I don't want to do anything that is detestable to God, which was unusual for me, because I was raised that God is 100% love, never gets angry. There's no wrath of God. That was the delusion of Christians, He loves, everything goes, he loves everyone, and you can do whatever you want, because God is completely forgiving and completely loving. When I read that you're not supposed to be a psychic, it was a revolution to me. I didn't know that. No one had told me that. When I was in New Age, I'd have Christians confronting me, but all they would do was send me 2 Corinthians 11:14, that even Satan appears as an angel of light, without context. And they were angry, and I was like, I don't know what you're trying to say. Not one person in those 25 years of being a public New Age speaker, not one person sat down and said, Doreen, can I just talk to you about Jesus? No one told me the gospel.
It was all
I'm
punch
shocked.
in the nose,
I'm just shocked that no one, maybe they were intimidated or afraid of rejection, and some people say, well, would you have listened? Well, they could have planted a seed. And so it's one of the reasons I'm evangelizing now, because no one told me, that's anyway.
So, I mean, basically everything that you needed to know about Jesus, I mean, the whole point, why he came, just the notion that, good grief, we're not all in the family of God, we're estranged from God, we have a sin problem, all that stuff.
That was novel to me.
Right. But you only picked it up by reading yourself.
Yeah.
So you never had a conversation, at least anything that was content-oriented with anybody.
No.
Well, that's.
No.
But
now I go to a
shocking.
Baptist church, and I take Bible study, and such.
Yeah.
It was 100% from reading the Bible. Yeah.
Wow. So what? Just a little bit before we wrap up, what has been, just in general terms, the response? Because you're going on, you still have your audience, and you're mixing, and then at some point you don't, you get away from the mixing.
Well, I told them I'm not doing cards anymore, and
Right.
I read everybody Deuteronomy 18:10, and that's when my publisher let me go, because they
Okay.
said I was putting down witchcraft, and that they thought they should be nice to every religion, is what they said.
So your publisher dumps you, and what happens with your audience?
And I would just want to say the publisher's been otherwise supportive since then.
Okay.
But the audience, people started to get very angry with me. What I have learned is that there's this Stockholm Syndrome that happens with the devil's minions. And I didn't realize that I was working for the devil. I had no idea. I didn't even believe there was a devil. But now I know that it's true. 2 Corinthians 11:14 is true. The devil appears as an angel of light. And some of those angels that were coming to me since childhood were demons. And I was channeling their messages of mixing truth and untruth. I didn't know it. I repented. And so people who follow the devil unknowingly are going through the Stockholm Syndrome, which means that you have sympathy for the devil. You have
Right.
sympathy for your captor. And whether they're Christians who unknowingly are following the devil, because there's a new age in the Christian world. I see it so clearly because I worked for the enemy for my whole life. And just like an ex-car thief can tell you how not to have your car stolen, I can instantly see the devil where it seems like other people are blind to him. And so I'm trying to show people the enemy, and then they get defensive. And so whether they're a Christian unknowingly following the devil, or they're a New Ager following the devil, they've got this sympathy for their captor, and you can tell who's following the devil because they immediately are like, no, no, and they're just so defensive, and that's the Stockholm Syndrome that I'm trying to help them with.
None of that makes you, antagonistic toward people who are just like you. I mean, you're obviously sympathetic.
Oh, I was them.
Yeah,
And so I'm trying to shine the light that I wish had been shown on me. I'm now 60 years old. I spent my whole life deluded and blinded, and it's hard not to say, what if someone had told me the gospel when I was 25? It's hard not to kind of rewind your life and say, what would it have been like? But I know that, Romans 8:28, God's using my past for good,
That's not in your job description, so
No.
don't worry about it.
No, I know that people are converting along with me. I get letters all the time now, and I get people's baptism photos, and that's my favorite to see. And I just pray that they don't go into a church that has New Age components. That's my concern.
Wow. Well, this has been really interesting. I've never met anybody that was sort of entrenched, in the New Age like you, as far as the big selling author. I mean, we've had other people on the show who were deeply involved, but you seem to be sort of a different, up a notch a little bit as far as exposure.
Yeah, the devil really used me.
Yeah. It's important for people to know that. I think especially in what we've talked about here, that now that you've switched sides, you don't view them as like enemies to shoot at.
Oh no, and I do not judge anybody. No, I have empathy. My heart bleeds for people who are still deceived, because I was there, and I'm trying to be the person I wish had come to me.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks for being with us and sharing your story.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah. And thank you for watching Fringe Pop 321, another episode. Please come back to our YouTube page and watch other episodes. We have topical episodes. We have interviews like this one. And please visit our companion website for resource information. And if you're interested in supporting what we do at Fringe Pop, please visit our Patreon page, patreon.com/FringePop321. And remember, what you know may not be so.